Okay, folks, lecture number 4, so we're moving right along in this course. Last time we were together, talked about a number of things, which we always talk about a number of things, to include that steel. You should be able to associate that with Henry Bessemer. Hope you recognize that name anyway. We also talked about oil, about the first oil wells that were developed here in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Edwin L. Drake was the person that was responsible for that. The oil wells were producing 500 barrels of oil per month. Okay, we also mentioned that associated with the oil industry, with that of John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil Company. We mentioned that about Spindletop, 1901, and you need to get comfortable with that. Also, we went through the Wright brothers. Wilbur and Orville Wright made the first powered flight in 1903, and that was in Kitty Hawk, which is in North Carolina. Frank Charles Duryea developed the first automobile. That's the first powered internal combustion engine car, which was in the United States. This was done so at Springfield, Massachusetts. Henry Ford, we made a casual mention of him. Also that of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, if you will, one of those railroad barons and one of the wealthiest men in our country. And let's see, we talked about corporations here. About horizontal consolidation, vertical consolidation. Also, we talked about this very popular author of that period of time who was known as Horatio Alger, a true believer in rags to riches. At least that's evident in what his books are anyway. Okay, so that was Horatio Alger. Also, labor unions. I wouldn't worry about those first couple of labor unions that we mentioned, but I do want you to recognize American Federation of Labor, and I want you to recognize Samuel Gompers, who was president of the American Federation of Labor from 1886 to 1924, with the exception of 1 year. Samuel Gompers. And we mentioned a number of strikes associated with this. You can look through this yourself here with the Homestead Steel Strike, Pullman Strike, the Haymarket Square Massacre, and so forth. And anyway, those were all strikes that took place, and then we closed out the class period talking about politics, at least getting into it a little bit here. We had 16 Republican states, 14 Democrat states, and we had 5 swing states. And for most of these elections that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes here, extremely close elections there. The Republicans and Democrats were just about equal in power, kind of like it is today here, folks. So anyway, let's go into our lecture for today. And I want to tell you about presidential elections, give you a hint on how to get close with this. As you well know, I do not hold you responsible for dates in this course, but there's kind of a catch to that. I'm not going to ask you, for example, here, when was Grover Cleveland president of the United States? But what I will ask you is who was elected president in 1884 and elected again in 1892. So here's kind of a catch to that. You do have to know the dates a little bit anyway. But anyway, let me try to help you out with this, folks, as we begin our presidential elections here. And I'll give you a brief refresher on this presidential election of 1876 and a little bit here. It'll be followed by the presidential election 1880, 1884, 1888, 1892, 1896, and 1900. All right, so let's look at it like this, and we'll spend a few minutes on this. Now, even though you don't need to memorize dates, I want you to reference a date here, if I can get myself located right. And this will be the first presidential election that we talk about this semester, other than I'll casually refresh your memory with that of the presidential election 1876. But memorize 1880. And if you have 1880 memorized, you're comfortable for the remainder of the semester. In other words, we all know that we have presidential elections in every 4 years. So if you remember the first presidential election here of 1880, then you know that 4 years later, the next presidential election is 1884. Next presidential election, 1888, 92, 96, 1900, 1904, 1908, 1912. You get the system here. Alrighty, now that's what I want you to remember here. I want you to know the dates. Now, you don't have to memorize them other than the first one, then you should be able to put it together. Very often I find on examination papers, students will, on the back of their exam, they will write out all the dates and just go ahead and identify the presidents with them so that they don't have to mull over it and think about it for a great period of time. Alright, so anyway, now notice here, This is what I want you to know, like 1880. But when that person is elected president in 1880, he is not inaugurated, and it is a he. He is not inaugurated until several months later. And at this time, we're talking about that inauguration date is in March. It is not in January as we have it currently. It would take a constitutional amendment that would change that. So this person elected in 1880 will be inaugurated in 1801 and will leave office in 1885. Unless he's reelected. And if he should be reelected, that next presidential election, to reelect the individual or to oust the individual, 1884. But likewise, this individual will not be inaugurated until 1885, and his tenure in office will be 1889. And you can follow down here for the rest of those. We are currently going to have a presidential election, and are currently had, because I'm still still before the election here in 2020 when I'm giving this lecture. But by the time you take this course, there will be a presidential election. It has taken place in 2020, and whoever is elected will either have a re-inauguration, if you will, or a new inauguration will take place in January of 2021. All right, so anyway, that's that. Maybe that'll help you out just a little bit with this and understanding it. So let's go back to our documents camera here. Brief refresher here. In the 1876 presidential election, Rutherford Bouchard Hayes, who was a Republican, Samuel J. Tilden, who was a Democrat, 61 years old Democrat, and by all rights, Samuel J. Tilden won that presidential election, but there were 20 contested electoral votes. Special commission was assembled to decide how those 20 question electoral votes would go. All Samuel Tilden needed was one electoral vote out of the 20. But he failed to get that, and all 20 electoral votes went to Rutherford B. Hayes, and he was elected president in 1876. That's the compromise of 1877, to refresh your memory from last semester anyway. As you might suspect, the administration of Rutherford B. Hayes was not very effective with that. It was all a sellout. And it was predetermined here. Rutherford B. Hayes promised he would only be a one-term president, and in return for this, the northern troops would be withdrawn from the South, and the South would become all Democrat, or largely Democrat. So let's move into our presidential election here of 1880. And I have to tell you that for the Republicans, as strong as they are, and they were strong, the Republicans had some differences. They had some differing philosophies here. And so this is going to cause a splintering into the Republican Party. And part of the Republican Party believed in the spoils system. They believed in traditional Republican values. And for this organization, this side of the Republicans, they call themselves the stalwarts. All right, this is the old-fashioned Republicans. And then we had the other group who was a little bit more progressive here. Believed in reform. They wanted civil service reform here. Do away with the spoils system, and they took the title the half-breeds. All right. Now, the differences here is not going to be enough to cause the Republicans to lose these elections, because the Democrats will only win 2 of the presidential elections of the ones that we've just been talking about here. So let's move into our 1880 presidential election, and you can see the candidates here for the Republicans. They went with James A. Garfield. James Abram Garfield. He had served as a brigadier general, a one-star general during the American Civil War for the North. Garfield's from Ohio, by the way, and Garfield is a half-breed. And we had also his running mate, who was Chester A. Arthur, and Arthur was a stalwart. And a stalwart, of course, believes in traditional Republican values, spoils system. Okay, and the Democrats ran as their candidate General Winfield Scott Hancock, who had been a 3-star general for the North during the American Civil War. Chester A. Arthur, by the way, is from New York, and I didn't write this down because it had minimal impact, but there was also another candidate in the presidential election of 1880, who was James B. Weaver, a brigadier general, 1-star general who fought for the North, and he's from Ohio. He's from Iowa, I mean to say, not Ohio, from Iowa. And he ran for the National Greenback Party. All right, so and it was not a very, very effective campaign with that. So let's take a look at the election results here. And sure enough, here with James A. Garfield, he picks up 48.5% of the popular vote to Winfield Scott Hancock, 48.1% of the vote. And across the country here, my friends, 39,000 votes, 39,213 votes separated Garfield from Winfield Scott Hancock. A very, very close race here. Electoral College was a little bit more decisive here. In the Electoral College, which is what determines who the president will be. For Garfield, he had 214 electoral votes, and for Winfield Scott Hancock, 155. I do not hold you responsible for any of those numbers here, but I do want you to be able to tell me who wins the presidential election. And that is James A. Garfield. Let me go over here, and we'll go back to me for a second here, folks, and let's see if I can get this lightened up a little bit. And if we can get this focus, here he is. This is James A. Garfield here. Notice the facial hair, and you'll find it on all of these presidents. They all have facial hair, with the exception of just actually two up until 1912. Anyway, okay, so anyway, let's go back to my camera here, and let's continue on with this, folks. All right, so we'll move along here, folks. And I want to tell you about James A. Garfield. He was, of course, elected president, inaugurated in March. So if I can get this to focus here, he was inaugurated in March of 1881. Now, unfortunately, about 4 months into the administration here, on the 2nd of July in 1881, James A. Garfield was shot. He was shot by this individual here, Charles Guiteau. Charles Guiteau, you pronounce it Guiteau if you wish to do so. And once he shot the president, he made a statement here, "I am a stalwart, and Arthur is now president." So what you got to do here, folks, you got to figure this out here. And Chester A. Arthur is Vice President of the United States. Chester A. Arthur is, of course, a believer in the spoils system here. And for Charles Guiteau, in his deranged mind, he felt like that he could get a political favor, out of the new president, Chester A. Arthur, rather than out of James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield, of course, was a reform president. All right, now the way this incident took place, and by the way, there's a very interesting documentary video for you folks to watch, and I want you to watch that. I expect you to do that. And what I'm telling you right now, pretty much parrots what's on that video, but I do want you to watch that anyway. But the president, James A. Garfield, was scheduled to make a visit to his alma mater, Williams College, which was located in Massachusetts. And so Garfield, with his bodyguards, had made their way down to the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station. And they were waiting to board this incoming train. And just 2 minutes later, the president would be on the train and pack safely away with that. But as he was standing there on the platform waiting for the train to come to a halt, an assassin, Charles Guiteau, stepped up beside him and at point-blank range fired 2 shots. And one of the shots just grazed Garfield. It went between his abdomen and his arm. And the other shot, unfortunately, went through the president's abdomen, and if I remember right, it severed the spinal column. So for Garfield, he was carried off to a treatment center there. The finest doctors at that time were brought in, and for the first doctor that went in, he took an ungloved finger and actually entered into the abdominal orifice, ungloved finger, if you can imagine, like my finger here, and just inserted it into the open cavity there. And of course, that creates a lot of infection immediately with that. And anyway, so he was unsuccessful in locating where the bullet was. So the Army Surgeon General came in and probed around, and again, in an aseptic environment there, couldn't find anything. Finally, the Naval Surgeon General said, "Move out of the way, fool, you don't know what you're doing. Let me try this." And he inserted a blunt instrument and actually penetrated the liver. So now we got a real problem on our hands here. And then somebody came up with the idea, why don't we locate a metal detector? And apparently Alexander Graham Bell had fashioned a very primitive metal detector, and so they brought this device in, they passed it over the president's body, and it just was just ding, 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 ding. And I say, well, I don't know what has happened here, but it has the appearances that the bullet has shattered into several pieces here. And so they said, well, we can't just find one bullet, it must be in many, many locations. So they made a 3-inch incision into a 20-inch incision, and now, we really have a serious problem on our hands there. Actually, what the metal detector was picking up was the mattress springs that was down below the president's body here. So the president lingered on for a number of months here. You can read about it, visualize it on videos there. Was taken to several places, to try to improve the atmospheric conditions there. Even had a primitive air conditioner installed, for him. But the president's condition failed to improve. A serious infections took place. We had oozing pus, wound to cover the president with that. All right, and then, of course, the president subsequently died. All right, and then if you watch the video, you'll see where the president is buried to this day. But I'm not going to tell you that right now. All right, let's go back to Charles Guiteau, and I should have kept the camera back on me here, folks. So what happened to Charles Guiteau? Charles Guiteau was, of course, incarcerated, and I have to tell you about this. Charles Guiteau, he was a pest, and he was a lawyer, an educated individual, but he tried to spend some time in the Oneida community, which he believed was a free love society. And in fact, for Charles Guiteau, the Oneida community just ousted him. They kicked him out of the organization there, and he hit on so many women they referred to him as Charles Get Out, rather than Charles Guiteau. But for Charles Guiteau, he knew he would probably go to prison, and so he'd even taken the foresight to go to the incarceration facility and converse with the warden and get the warden to take him on a guided tour around the incarceration facility. He didn't want to live in a dump, and so when he got there, he thought, I can probably handle this. All righty, so they went to the trial, and when they tried, Charles Guiteau, his attorneys said, if you probably can imagine this, his attorneys alibied that it wasn't Charles Guiteau that killed the president. Who killed the president? Well, it was the surgeons that killed the president. The jury didn't buy into that, and Charles Guiteau was sentenced to hang, and he was hanged here, folks. All righty, so supposedly after that, all flesh was removed from the skeletal system, and the way it goes anyway, supposedly the blanched bones of Charles Guiteau are in the Army Medical Museum in Washington, D.C., in a box, by the way. I don't know. I have never seen those anyway. So that's Charles Guiteau for you. So let's go back to the camera here. And Chester A. Arthur now becomes President of the United States. And let's see here if I can find a likeness here of Chester A. Arthur. And I don't see that. I must have, hang on here, folks. I don't see Chester A. Arthur, and I apologize for that. And so I had to locate a likeness of him, photograph of him at a later time. People refer to him as Elegant Arthur. Some people call him the Gentleman Boss. Not a very effective president, in my estimation, anyway. He had 80 pairs of pants. I don't know why I told you that. 80 pairs of trousers. He would change his clothes very frequently. And, it's difficult enough to get dressed once a day. I don't see why in the world you want to change your outfits, for several times a day. And I thought that was, rather unique myself when I read, years ago that he had these 80 pairs of trousers. And I thought, why in the world would anybody ever want 80 pairs of pants? And I went home to my house, and I'm a person who's not even fashion conscious here, folks. My dress is of very little importance to me. And I counted the number of trousers that I had in my closet, and I had 83 pairs of trousers. And I also counted the number of dress shirts I had. I had 126 dress shirts. And I'll repeat myself, and that's a person that doesn't even care about his personal appearance with clothing. So I don't know. Arthur also had, I think it was 38 wagon loads of old junk and furniture carted away from the White House, which dated back from many, many presidencies. He liked to keep the nightlife. He liked to go out to the honky-tonks. And the press caught a hold of that, and the press, said, what's going on with the president? The president's going out and tomcatting it and just going to these honky-tonks. And Arthur made the comment, he said, I may be the president of the United States, but my private life's my own damn business. All right, so anyway, that's Chester A. Arthur for you. Okay, and Chester A. Arthur, who is from New York, by the way, the Gentleman Boss here. But one of the things that will take place, and I want you to recognize this, one of the things that takes place under the Arthur administration, in 1883, the Pendleton Act passed. The Pendleton Act, more precisely, is called the Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. I prefer just to describe it as the Pendleton Act. And what it's going to do here, folks, is going to establish a civil service system here. This is the beginning of it now. We've got a long way to go, but this is going to be the beginning of it here, where a government job will be determined by a person that passes a civil service examination and scores the highest with that. Personally, I have no issue with that. I think that's the way it should be. You know, the person that is best qualified for the position should get the position. So this was the beginning of it right there, trying to remove the spoil system. All right, so let's move on down into our next presidential election here. This is presidential election, which was of 1884. It was a nasty, nasty presidential election here. And for the Republicans, they ran as their candidate a man, a not very honest individual, by the way. His name was James G. Blaine. And let me go back very quickly here and let you see James G. Blaine. And here he is. I'm covering up the other person here. But this is James G. Blaine right there. He had a long history of politics. James G. Blaine had been the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Had been in the Grant administration. Not known for his honesty. People gave him the nickname the Plume Knight. He's James G. Blaine. He's from Maine, by the way. Maine, we don't see many presidential candidates from Maine. And he'd been associated with several of the scandals, particularly with railroad scandals. The Cri de Mobile that we talked about at an earlier time here. My phone's going off, and I apologize for that. And it is across my office, so I can't keep up with that here. So, okay, and anyway, let me get my train of thought back on here, folks. And he had written a letter which was called the Mulligan Letter, which had exposed him, you know, as being a corrupt politician. All right, now for the Democrats ran as their candidate a man by the name of Grover Cleveland. And lo and behold, I just looked over here and found my likeness here of Chester A. Arthur. So I'm going to go back here to myself and let you see what Chester A. Arthur looked like. And I don't know, his photograph a few minutes ago just eluded me, and I just didn't see it right here. But let me show you what Grover Cleveland looks like. And Grover Cleveland, here he is right here. He's from New York. He was the governor of New York. People refer to him as the veto governor. He was vowed that he would stand up to the Democratic political machine, which is known as Tammany Hall. But anyway, that's Grover. People called him Grover the Good, the veto governor. He was, how shall I put it? We got to be so careful today here, folks. So many people are sensitive, and particularly we don't want to fat shame somebody. But he was how shall I put this? He was a rather portly individual, an obese individual. He was a bachelor, by the way. He was not married. But anyway, known for his honesty here, to tell the truth. That was his motto, always tell the truth. All right, so anyway, and that's Grover Cleveland. So let's, I don't want to give you the election results right now, but I think I better keep the camera on me because I've got a little story to tell you about this. And for the Democrats, they were talking about James G. Blaine, and they were coined a little phrase here, and it went, Blaine, James G. Blaine, the Continental Liar from the state of Maine. Burn that letter. That's a Mulligan letter. And then it was revealed by the Republicans that Grover Cleveland was the father of an illegitimate child. Whoa, how about that anyway? This child was 11 years old, and I'll give you his name in just a few minutes here. And when the press approached Grover Cleveland, are you the father of this illegitimate 11-year-old boy? Grover Cleveland looked down and he said, I am. Remember, tell the truth. You always tell the truth here. All righty, so the Republicans fired back. They said, I made a comment here, Ma, where's my Paul? And of course, talking about Grover Cleveland. All right, so anyway, let's carry this a little bit further here, folks. I want to go back to my camera here, and let's take a look at the presidential election results here. And for Grover Cleveland, he will end up with 48.5% of the votes and popular votes. And for James G. Blaine, it was 48.2% of the popular votes. There were 29,000 votes across the country that separated the Grover Cleveland from that of James G. Blaine. And if we look at the Electoral College, and the Electoral College here, it was 219 votes here for Grover Cleveland, and we had 182 for James G. Blaine. So Grover the Good, Uncle Jumbo, was going to win that presidential election here. And for the Democrats fired back with this, and they said, Ma, where's my Paul? He's gone to the White House. Ha, ha, ha. All right, so shall we move on here, folks? Well, Grover the Good here. Now, people called him, like I said, the veto governor here, Uncle Jumbo. Now, the lady in question, who was the mother of this child, and there's no question she was the mother of the child, but her name was Maria Halpin. Sometimes you'll see this as Helpin, Maria Halpin. And actually, she didn't know who the father of the child was. And for Maria Halpin, she had taken the foresight here to name the child, this little 11-year-old boy, she named him Oscar Folsom Cleveland. And it's kind of interesting here because Folsom here, Folsom is the name of the law partner to Grover Cleveland. So to cover the bases, she named him for the law partner and Grover Cleveland. She wasn't sure who the daddy was. In fact, she had slept with all of Grover Cleveland's friends here. I mean, what are friends for? Okay, so she named it Oscar Folsom Cleveland here. All right, and for the Democrats fired back with hooray for Maria, hooray for the kid. We voted for Grover, and we're damn glad we did. I'm not making that up here, class. All right, so let's move on here. And Grover Cleveland went to the White House, and Grover Cleveland, by golly, this bachelor, he took a wife. People called her Frankie. Her name was Frances Folsom. I'll let that sink in for just a second here. Her name was Frances Folsom. Now, if you see anything kind of unusual with this, Frances Folsom is the daughter of Folsom, who was the law partner of Grover Cleveland. Huh, how about that? How about that? And what happened here is that when Mr. Folsom died, who was the law partner to Grover Cleveland, he left his daughter in the custody of Grover Cleveland to take care of her. And he took care of her all right. He married the woman here. She was 26, and I think Grover Cleveland was about 45. Yeah, she was 21, and Grover Cleveland was 45. So they went to the White House here, and the country just loved this happy couple here, you know, young Frankie, and then we had the Uncle Jumbo, the gentleman boss here. And by golly, they had a child together, and this little girl born, and she lived in a White House, and they named her Ruth. And there was a candy bar company that was so fascinated with her that they developed a candy bar, and they named that candy bar Baby Ruth, which is exactly what the public referred to Ruth as Baby Ruth. Unfortunately, she died at a young age. All right, so let's move on here, folks. Now, one of the things here about Grover Cleveland and the Democrats, Grover Cleveland and the Democrats always wanted to lower the protective tariff. Grover Cleveland felt like that if we have a high protective tariff, this creates an abundance, a surplus of money in the national treasury here, and this encourages frivolous spending. And so what Grover Cleveland and the Democrats were doing, they were saying, keep the tariff low. If we keep it low, then we don't have this tendency, you know, to overspend with things. The Republicans, on the other hand, always want to raise the protective tariff. So when we move into our next presidential election, this presidential election 1888, the protective tariff is going to be a big factor here. Do we keep it low? Do we raise the protective tariff as the Republicans want? So we'll go back to my camera here, folks, and let's move on into our presidential election here of 1888. All right, here's what we have here. We have Grover Cleveland, Uncle Jumbo as the Democratic candidate. We have Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin Harrison is the Republican candidate. Benjamin Harrison is from Indiana, by the way. William Henry Harrison had been his grandfather. He had another great-grandfather, had been an signer of the Declaration of Independence anyway. And not a very inspiring individual, Benjamin Harrison, but he is a Republican, by the way. And this is the 1882 presidential election. And if we look at the results here for Grover Cleveland, he gets 48.6% of the popular vote. Benjamin Harrison gets 47.9% of the popular vote. And if we look at the Electoral College, which is what matters here, Benjamin Harrison 233 to Grover Cleveland 168. So this will be the second presidential election in United States history, and I think it's happened 6 times in the history of our country here where the president that does not win the popular vote does win the Electoral College, which is what counts here, folks. All right, so Benjamin Harrison now becomes the next president of the United States, and of course we're going to see the protective tariff to rise. Here's what Benjamin Harrison looks like here. Notice the facial hair and notice facial hair. If you looked at Grover Cleveland, he also had a bushy mustache, so he had facial hair likewise. Okay, so back we go here, folks, to our camera, and let's see what else is going to take place here. All right, and there's a man we'll talk much more about later in the class period. This individual is known as William McKinley. William McKinley was a representative from the state of Ohio, but in 1890, William McKinley pushed through Congress the McKinley Tariff Act, and it would create the highest protective tariff in the history of our country to that date. Anyway, McKinley Tariff Act. Unfortunately for William McKinley, and I cannot believe this, William McKinley was voted out of office in that year, and he's not through. He will be back, I promise you, good folks here. But anyway, that was that. Okay, so let's move on to our presidential election of 1892, and let me get this position for you here. Presidential election 1892, and the Republican will be Benjamin Harrison. The Democrats will run once again Grover Cleveland, and the People's Party, and we'll talk a little bit about this later in the class period. The People's Party will choose their candidate. This was a guy that ran on the National Greenback Party ticket back in 1880 anyway. James B. Weaver, one-star general from Iowa. Grover Cleveland, by the way, I failed to tell you this a few minutes ago. You know, it was he was living during the American Civil War, but he did not serve, by the way. He paid the government $300, and he was able to get a substitute, so he did not serve. Benjamin Harrison, on the other hand, I didn't say this a few minutes ago, Benjamin Harrison was a one-star general that fought for the North. All right, so anyway, Grover Cleveland did not experience military service. All right, so let's take a look at the election results, and I have to tell you folks that once again we see this political pendulum swinging in the opposite direction. It's what so very much happens in politics. It'll go to the Republican side for a while, then gradually it'll shift back to the Democratic side, then back to the Republican side. All right, now our history has proven that. All right, so anyway, for the election results here, Benjamin Harrison had 43% of the popular votes. Grover Cleveland had 46%. And amazingly, for a third-party candidate, James Weaver ended up with 8.5% of the popular vote. And if we look at the Electoral College here, in the Electoral College, Grover Cleveland had 277, Benjamin Harrison 145, and James Weaver an amazing 22 electoral votes with the People's Party we'll talk about later on. So who wins the presidential election here? Once again, we're going to go back to Grover Cleveland, and you can take a look at that bushy mustache that he has there. All right, this is Grover Cleveland. Okay, Uncle Jumbo. All right, on we go here, folks, and let's see what else is in store for us as we move back to our document camera here. And let me put another slide here for you. And in 1887, this was actually under Benjamin Harrison's administration, Congress passed, and the President signed, the Interstate Commerce Act. It's a big piece of legislation, and I'm trying to simplify it for you here, folks. But basically what it's going to do is going to serve to regulate railroads. All right, so anyway, tightens up the control on railroads. Now, during this time, a popular movement, and it recently, I'm talking about in the past couple of years here, has gained some movement here in the United States. And it's a movement which is called populism. It's a broad political coalition. Often it's associated with farmers, particularly farmers that don't have a great deal of land here, folks. And it's a complicated thing, but basically what it is, it's a demand for the government to control the utilities. I'm talking about like telephones and railroads and telegraphs of that period of time. Populism. All right, now, after the Civil War, an organization formed which was called the Patrons of Husbandry. Now, they refer to themselves as Grangers. Now, if you ever see this word, Granger, Granger means like farmers. Granger means farmers. Actually, a grange is like a farmstead, like a farmhouse, you know, with the accompanying land with that. And originally what it was designed to do was for farmers to come together and share information about new advancements in scientific agricultural techniques, what works well for everybody. And what these farmers were trying to do, everybody come together and we share this information here. And what we want to do, we want to create, and I can't can't speak this language very well, folks, but they wanted to create farmers' cooperatives where farmers could buy in bulk and they could buy on credit. It wouldn't be pressed to, if you bought on credit, to pay back very quickly. You could wait until your crops were harvested, and then when you made a profit, then you could pay back your loans with that. And that was a part of it there. They wanted all the farmers to come together to create creameries, warehouses, silos, farmers' banks, farmers' insurance. It's just all farmers coming together for a common cause with that. They had as many as 800,000 members. I think it was something like 400 lodges across the country. But eventually what's going to happen, the Granger movement by the 1870s anyway, the Granger movement is going to now evolve in what is called the Farmers' Alliances. Now, you remember the People's Party that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago? Well, the People's Party becomes very closely associated with these Farmers' Alliances here. So these are farmers. These are farmers. Everybody come together for the common good here. All right, so let's go back to the camera here, and let's see here. Okay, so these are the Farmers' Alliances. It was Farmers' Alliance was very popular throughout our country. You just had an overall Farmers' Alliance. You had the Northwest Farmers' Alliance. You had the Colored Farmers' Alliance, for African-American farmers. It grew large in size. Now, one of the individuals so closely associated with this was a person by the name of Mary Elizabeth Lease. People refer to her as the Kansas Cyclone, the Kansas Pythoness. Here's what she looks like here, folks. I would not want to get crossed up with this woman here. This is what she looked like. And here she is up here. This is a little bit better portrait of her right here, Mary Elizabeth Lease. And she encouraged farmers to grow less corn and to raise more hay. All right, the Kansas Python, Kansas Cyclone is what she was known as. I think you need to remember that name, Mary E. Lease. Okay, here, friends, as we move right along, unfortunately, here under Grover Cleveland's administration, we're going to enter into a depression. This is the worst depression in the history of our country. Worst depression. Now, this depression is called the Panic of 1893. Panic of 1893. All right, now, we're going to have worse depressions than that. But this was the worst one to that day. And what's going to start it here, folks? Well, and I'm going to give you a series of events. We have the bankruptcy of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. Now, for those of you that play Monopoly, I don't know if anybody still plays board games, but those of you that play Monopoly, you've been pronouncing this as Reading Railroad incorrectly for a long time, most likely anyway. But there's a Reading, Pennsylvania, and that's what this is. Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. And it went bankrupt. And 2 months later, another company went bankrupt, the National Cordage Company, made rope. That's products related to rope. And when both of those companies went bankrupt, this caused the stock market to crash. Now, I want you to pay attention to these events here, because when we get up into 1929, we're going to see these events replicate themselves here, folks. Stock market crashes. And when the stock markets crashed, some of the banks failed. I'll give you the numbers for those in just a few minutes here. When banks failed, if you had your money that was tied up in a bank, that meant that you lost your money here. For those banks that remained open, they began to call in loans, tighten up credits. And when you call in loans and tighten up credit, guess what happens here, folks? Businesses close. And when businesses close, what happens to unemployment? And you know what happens to unemployment as people lose their jobs. So in a matter of 6 months, we had 15,000 businesses to close, 156 railroads to close, 491 banks to close, and in 6 months, over 1 million workers lost their jobs here. So, who always gets blamed, right or wrong, for a recession or a depression? It is the President of the United States. So that's going to fall into the lap there of Grover Cleveland. So, Grover Cleveland and the Democrats all claim, they say, well, this is caused by instability of the currency here. Instability of the currency. All right, now, let me give you a little lesson here, folks, and this is something that you can't relate to today anyway. But historically, our money, our monetary system in the United States of America has historically been based upon a precious metal, either silver or gold. Today, it is based on faith in the government. That's not very encouraging to me. But traditionally, it was silver and gold. And what you generally had, you had a ratio of 16 to 1. This means if we had, for example, 16 ounces of silver, that would equate to 1 ounce of gold. All right, let's see if I made some more notes here. And our country began to divide into those that were in support of free silver and those that were in support of gold. So we had the free silver people and we had the gold bug people here. Now the idea is that silver is much easier to get your hands on. I use an example in class here, folks. Let's say, for example, here that I have 17 coins in my pocket. I have, we'll say that gold is a quarter and that pennies are silver. And if I have 17 coins in my pocket and one is a quarter and 16 of them are pennies, if I reach in my pocket, what will I probably pull out? And it will probably be a penny, which is silver. And the point I'm trying to make to you, good folks, it is easier to put your hands on silver than it is to put your hands on gold. So silver is people's money. It's for the common individual, whereas gold is for the wealthy, the aristocracy here. Gold is indicative of oppression to people. Now, what this is going to do, this is going to become the basis for the next presidential election, and that presidential election is 1896. So let's go back to my camera here, and that's going to be the basis of this election. What do we do? Do we go on a gold standard or do we go on a silver standard? All right, and these are our candidates here. In the 1896 presidential election, we have for the Republicans, William McKinley. Now, William McKinley is a gold bug. This is the individual that also wanted to raise the protective tariffs to the highest level ever. And if you look here, we can see a likeness here of William McKinley. Notice no facial hair. No facial hair, and that is very, very unusual. All right, so we'll go back here so we can pick up our notes here that you can read them anyway. And his opponent is a young man, and he's only 38 years of age here, 36 years of age, I'm sorry there. And this person's name is William Jennings Bryan. Let's see if I have a likeness here of William Jennings Bryan, and I do. Here's William McKinley here, and this is William Jennings Bryan right there. You can also see another likeness here. I can't make it fit under the camera, so we just have to live with that. William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan is often referred to as the boy orator of the Platte. Boy orator of the Platte. He's from Nebraska, by the way, and some people call him the Great Commoner. Here we go. You can see this. The boy orator of the Platte or the Great Commoner. 36 years of age here. And he is our first presidential candidate here, folks, that is actually going to go out and campaign himself. He traveled 18,000 miles and he addressed over 5 million people. For William McKinley didn't do that. That is not becoming of a gentleman, and William McKinley ran a front porch campaign here. All right, you match it up to presidential candidates here in 2020. You could pretty much say that Mr. Biden is running a front porch campaign. He is not out campaigning as his opponent is President Trump. President Trump is out rallying with the people, right or wrong. That's two different types, two different philosophies. Most of our candidates since this election here of 1896 have chosen to run for office rather than stand for office. Okay, so gold is the silver issue is the big factor here in this presidential election. So let's take a look at our election results here. And for the popular vote, William McKinley gets 51%, and for William Jennings Bryan, he will get 48%, and for William McKinley, 271 electoral votes, and for William Jennings Bryan, 176 electoral votes. So William McKinley, the Republican, wins that presidential election here, folks. And I don't think you'll be one bit surprised with this. And what the Republican-controlled Congress and William McKinley are going to do, they're going to pass, this is about the year 1900 anyway, they passed the Dingley tariff, which allows for the highest protective tariff in the history of our country to go into effect. And the Republicans passed the Gold Standard Act, and our country went on the gold standard in 1900. We are not on the gold standard today here, folks. Okay, so anyway, that carries us right up here, folks, to almost the turn of the century here. And interesting as we finally get into politics a little bit here, folks. So we're going to stop for the day here. I appreciate your attention here. Thank you.